20 minutes to 1 o'clock. Good afternoon to you. You with the Midday Report, where you won't miss a thing. Well, in Joburg at the mining indaba this morning, a speech by the chairman of Anglo Gold Ashanti, Sipho, Pityana, in which he says the very independence of our republic is under threat from corruption and that President Jacob Zuma must go. Well, Sipho Pityana is in our Joburg studios with us now. Sipho, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time today. Why do you believe our independence is at stake?
Well, the responsibility of a president of a country is to ensure that you protect the resources of the state, you protect the integrity of the state. Clearly, the point I was making there was that the suggestions of state capture have foundation, and to the extent that this is so, they represent an attack on the very sovereignty of the nation. And the implication of the president in one way or another with those clearly suggests that a gatekeeper in the president that we as citizens have put there to ensure that that doesn't happen is not in a position to do that. And that's why I believe that this suggests an attack on the sovereignty.
Do you believe that he literally is in debt to the Guptas? He's literally doing a job for the Gupta family? I mean, are you prepared to go that far?
Well, I think that if you have your family members associated with that company, and then you have a situation where, in an extraordinary way, cabinet is put in a fracas because banks have refused to have closed their accounts with this particular family, it becomes a cabinet matter. And to an extent where you assign members of your cabinet to go and have discussions with the banks to try and facilitate this. Banks do this all the time. Various businesses have had this and have closed and without a whisker from cabinet. It does say something that there's a special relationship that is unhealthy. It does say that president may be acting in particular interests that are about advancing interests of a particular family. President should be concerned that the financial regulatory system is sound, it has integrity, and should be satisfied when banks are actually taking measures to ensure that those of us who are not suited to be on their accounts are not, and not harass them and harangue them. But more importantly for me is what I consider to be a frontal attack on the Treasury. It's not a personality fight between the president and the Minister of Finance. It is about opening the floodgates because Treasury, in my view, is our last line of defense. If you run over Treasury, the state coffers will be raided unimpeded. And we see that happening in state-owned entities. We see that happening in state government departments, etc., etc. And the chaos that you see there is not unstoppable, is not beyond change. You actually have the National Development Plan mapping out what needs to be done to sort out that chaos there. Nobody's paying attention to it because a chaotic environment is exactly the one that is permissive to all of these things happening.
One of the things that happened, I mean, it happened late last year in December. It seems to have been the sale of our oil reserves. Business Day's been very big on this story. It was only uncovered this year. The Energy Ministry says it was simply a rotation of stock. It seems obvious someone has made millions of dollars, I mean, not rands, dollars in this. Is that the kind of incident, the kind of looting that you're talking about? Well, Stephen, there's been silence on this issue.
Stephen, how far do we go? Then is the oil. Then is the financial problems that afflict SAA. Then is funny tender arrangements that relate to Transnet and Eskom. Then is the dealings and joint ventures with the Guptas in respect of Dinel. Then is this, then is that. It's a litany of things, and the amounts of money involved are huge. Now, if you look at the challenges that the country faces, and all of this happening, the wastage that is happening, the corruption that's happening, that is permitted, you clearly must say that what citizens are saying is that if you have money to waste in this way on these things, even before you consider the amount of money spent on President Zuma's homestead in Nkandla, clearly people are justified to say that you can't tell us you don't have money. You must have money to do some of the more important things, which include educating our young, sorting out employment for the youth, ensuring that the infirm are assisted, sorting out our health system. Those are critical things where this money should be going, but it's not. It's going to serve interests of cronies and those that are close to certain people in power.
You say President Jacob Zuma should go, and I mean, we're all aware of the claims against him. We're all aware of his defences against those claims. But he is, in a way, and I'll accept that he's a symbol of what people see as going wrong, or of what many people see as going wrong. But is it really just about him? I mean, he was elected. He has a group of people who support him. There is, I mean, Bladen Zamande talks about the factionalism in the ANC that's led to this. If he were to go, would it really make a big difference? Gwede Mantashe told the Black Management Forum just this morning that he didn't think it would make a big difference if Jacob Zuma went.
Well, I'm disappointed that he thinks so. I certainly do believe that if you have a president who is entrusted with a constitution and who has sworn allegiance to a constitution that is strongly averse to abuse of state resources and has been caught, in fact, and found by no less a body than the Constitutional Court to have allowed resources of the state to be used for his personal benefit and for the benefit of the family. You can't expect the same president to lead the charge in stopping corruption and all of those. So in my view, it would send a very important signal to society that if you're a president who's sworn allegiance to the Constitution and you've been found not to honor it, and you've been found to have benefited unduly from the resources of the state, it does mean that you must step down. Otherwise, the office of the president is tarnished. How can you expect anybody to believe any other promise that you make to them when you've shown yourself to be lacking integrity, not to be honest, and not to be trustworthy? How can you expect people to place trust in your leadership?
I mean, I accept all of that. I'm not going to argue with that. But I mean, my point is that hasn't the culture of corruption, I mean, this is what the critics of the ANC and critics of government would say, is that the culture of corruption started long before President Jacob Zuma. It was at the Polokwane conference, just before the Polokwane conference, when Kgalema Motlanthe gave that interview in which he said almost every project in a town council controlled by the ANC is now created with the idea of skimming money off it, I mean, would it really change if President Jacob Zuma, sure the symbol, sure the example, sure all of those things, but hasn't a culture of corruption seeped into our very fabric in a way that means it's not just about Zuma, is my point?
Well, I hope that it would make a big difference. Otherwise, I wouldn't be pushing that he goes. Because one of the things that I think President Zuma has done, which is very damaging, is that despite the fact that we have a legal framework and a plethora of institutions that constitute a fantastic arsenal to fight corruption, he's done everything in his power to make sure that we don't have appropriate people to occupy roles there that will ensure that those institutions are led properly to ensure that they play their role. For instance, the public protector stands out. But in fact, the fight that we had around the law establishing the Hawks enabled it to have the same powers as the public protector. And guess what? He quickly moved in and removed Anwar Dramat and put somebody there who is utterly incompetent to do the work that he's supposed to do. Why? Because he doesn't want that institution to work in the way that it's intended to work. You can go down the list. It's crippled the functioning of the National Prosecution Authority. He has tried to undermine the independence of the judiciary by extending the term of office of the Chief Justice illegally. So there's been a very orchestrated and concerted effort to undermine criminal justice institutions to ensure that the corruption that we see today thrives. And guess what? The results are clear. We have a very difficult corruption environment. I don't believe it's irreversible. I believe that a journey to reversing corruption in this country starts with removing President Jacob Zuma. And then that gives an opportunity to people who take over to actually be held to account in respect of all these other things.
I mean, you've been, in a way, on a campaign. I don't know if you'd put that word to it, but I'll use that word against President Jacob Zuma, calling him for him to go. It started, of course, with the speech you gave at the funeral of Makankesi Stofile. But is this just Sipho Pityana, or do you have people with you, or are you on your own in this?
Well, Stephen, I know that South Africa is in such desperate space, and it tends to look for messiahs. I'm not one. I think that I wasn't the first person to raise this. Interestingly, the church leaders were among the first who said that President Zuma should go. Ahmed Kathrada, somebody for whom I have great regard, who made this plea that the president should resign. There are many voices, powerful, legitimate, credible voices that recognize and say that President Zuma should go. And I believe that ignoring these voices warrants society to enjoin, to make its voice, its collective voice, heard, if not by the president, certainly by the ANC, and absolutely by our elected representatives. Because those are the people who should be able to vote him out if he doesn't resign, or if the ANC doesn't recall him. Then Parliament must impeach him, and members of Parliament must recognize that society is dead against having a president who doesn't have integrity.
We all have a vague understanding of how power works. I mean, the ANC, for all its problems, is still really where power works. It's still the NEC. Do you have any supporters on the NEC?
I don't think that there is a unanimous view in the ANC about the efficacy of continuing to have such a discredited leader, a leader who is associated with everything that has cost the ANC its standing in society, as demonstrated in the local government elections. There are a lot of people who share the view that the answer to the problems that we have start with the president having to go. Everybody hopes that you achieve that without causing the split that we saw with the recall of President Mbeki. I can understand that. I can relate to it. But I just think that if there was a greater reason to recall a president, this is the one. If President Mbeki was recalled previously for whatever reasons, they can't be greater than what we see today. We have a desperate situation of a president who has no integrity, who has no respect for ANC policy, who is putting the ANC in disrepute. So that president has to go, in my view.
You want business to raise its voice. I mean, some business leaders have spoken up since you spoke. Neil Froneman, I think, is one. Many businesses are staying quiet. Is it because those businesses are led by white people, white men generally? They feel they maybe don't have legitimacy. I mean, if they speak up, aren't they just going to be called white apartheid monopoly capital? Does business have a legitimacy problem in our politics in this country? Well,
surprise, Stephen. I've also been called white.
I'm sure.
I've been called monopoly, and I've been called capital, and I'm neither of those. And I went and looked at myself in the mirror once more. But the fact of the matter is that when you raise issues and when people can't deal with the argument, they will go for other ulterior considerations. The fact of the matter is that for South Africa to get out of the crisis that it's facing today, the elephant in the room is a president who lacks integrity, who is dishonest, a president whose word doesn't count. He literally ran away from the students in an indaba or imbizo that he called. He should have said that this is one of the biggest crises that we're facing, and students wanted to hear him out, wanted to have a conversation with him to say, Mr. President, we've had a meeting with your minister. We don't like what he has to say to us, but we want to have a discussion with you as to how we can get out of this. He needed to use his authority as a president to convey a sense that he is seized with the matter. But he ran away because he made a promise to them that he would deliver free education. And it was a promise that he knew that he was never going to honor. He had made a promise that he would deliver increased number of jobs. As he made that promise, the economy in the world was going the other way, and therefore there was no prospect of jobs being created. He made it nonetheless. He must have known that he was never going to deliver that promise. He has a litany of promises that he makes across society, and this is causing huge amounts of social tension as expectations are raised.
I have to ask, I mean, you as someone who you worked in the government of former President Thabo Mbeki. Yes. I mean, I think you might wear proudly or unproudly the phrase Mbekiite. Yeah. Your critics will say you're only calling for action against President Jacob Zuma because you lost the battle at Polokwane. Your war continues against Zuma.
I don't think that people who follow ANC politics would call me a Mbekiite. And that's notwithstanding the fact that I think that Thabo Mbeki is one of the greatest leaders that South Africa has produced. And one can say in the same breath that Jacob Zuma is one of the worst leaders that ANC in its entire history has produced. So it's quite obvious that ANC leadership and ANC members should come to terms with this and ask President Zuma to please step down.
Do you believe the ANC can self-correct? I mean, in 2019, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, if you've had your supporters give you a signal that says that we don't like what is happening, and we have 2 NEC meetings after that statement, after the electorate has sent that message, and you have nothing to say to your followers and to your supporters, I think that you actually are asking them and begging and pleading them to kick you out in 2019. And I'm very disappointed about that, because I think that ANC has a lot to offer. What this crisis requires is a leadership in ANC that must confront the fact that we're not in a good space. We need to move with speed to convey a sense to society that Zuma leadership is unacceptable. The current leadership of the ANC in the NEC is part of the problem, and that we need to move with speed to find a more responsive leadership that will deal with the crisis that is facing the country.
Sipho Pityana, the chairman of Anglo Gold Ashanti, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
The Midday Report on 702.
Your number one news and talk station.